recording. So today the ds-incubator is not about Shiny, it is instead about two versions of the package r2dii.plot, which is approaching release, and we would like some feedback from all of you in free form, which we will give some time at the end to ask questions, give feedback, and also to discuss the process, which is an idea that Monica brought up before we started the meeting. Not just presenting what we want to present, but also discuss, if there is time, the process that we went through in the whole development of the package. And so we'll cover that hopefully at the end. So what's going to happen now is we're going to be talking about two versions of a package. The release product will have only one version, the one that comes from the feedback that we gather from you. Maybe it's one, maybe it's the other one, or maybe it's a mix of the two. But we would like to have a 5 minutes product basically to show to specific people. Some of them are already in the room, so it's going to be even more useful to have you here. But that 5 minutes demo is basically the comparison between the two options that we are offering our beta testers now. And then we're going to cover, beyond those 5 minutes, we're going to cover the two versions in more depth. So the first 5 minutes is going to be simply the comparison, and then the rest of the time is going to be me and Monica talking about the two versions at depth. Before we start, do we have any comment or question just now? Something that won't need to wait for the end, something general? No? Let's see if I can share my screen. I'm not sharing my screen yet, right now. Entire window. So for a moment, you should see your beautiful faces. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to jump to, well, first I'm going to ask you to give me a thumbs up if you see my screen. Yes, perfect. And let's jump to the website of the package. So if you go to this URL, you will land in the website of the r2dii.plot package, which is not yet on CRAN. The README file is not all that helpful right now. It's a bit of a big bag with a bunch of things. But instead, we would like to drive your attention to the section articles. So I'm going to be clicking the very first link under the articles menu, which compares two versions. Usually, people refer to two versions of an application user interface, an API, as A and B. We chose X and Y for internal reasons. So I'm going to be talking in these next 5 minutes about the two versions that we would like to offer to you. So r2dii.plot just now and in a temporary way comes in the form X and Y. You install it from GitHub as usual with install_GitHub and 2 degrees investing r2dii.plot. You can copy each chunk of code from here, and then you could paste it if you wanted in your R session. You could do something like this, just paste it there, which is a convenient way for you to try what you read on that article. So beyond reading it, if you can have the time to actually try it yourself, that would be very helpful to us. So in this package, the goal is to create beautiful plots of r2dii data that are also informative and also easy to use. So those are this is the mission of the package. So once you install it, then you will be able to play with the code. One thing that is embedded in the design of the package is that it is meant to be used fluidly with packages in the r2dii ecosystem, so packages like r2dii data, r2dii match, and r2dii analysis. And it also plays well with packages in the tidyverse, particularly the dplyr package is useful for preparing the data, and the ggplot2 package is useful for extending the plots and customizing them. So for this demo, the three most important packages that you'll need are these three, dplyr, ggplot2, and r2dii.plot, which is the package that we are using now. In terms of the data is the data that comes out of the r2dii analysis. There's two data sets that typically you would be using with this package. One is the output of the function target SDA from the r2dii analysis package, and this is a little demo data set. It's called SDA. A little demo data set that we include with r2dii.plot so that you don't have to run the workflow all the way back to the r2dii analysis package. So you already have something to play with, so you can try it right away. And then the second type of data that you may typically have is the one that comes from the output of the function target market share in the r2dii package, and r2dii analysis package. And here again, we give you an example data set that is called market share. So with those two data sets, you should be ready to try the entire package, right? The two different interfaces. So as I said before, we are currently supporting two different interfaces, and each of those can create three different kinds of plots: the timeline plot, the techniques plot, and the trajectory plot. Each of those comes in X and Y versions, and the difference is basically between these two interfaces in the way they meet the requirements for the data that they need for inputs. So each of those versions of the package have need to input some data, and how you structure that data is a little different in the version X and in the version Y. Also in the number of arguments that are included in the functions. So with the version X, mostly you meet the data requirements in two ways. One way through the filter function in the dplyr fact package, or any other function that allows you to subset a data set to specific rows, and that is usually because the data set you typically come with more rows that you need for a specific plot. And then the second way in which it meets the data requirements is through some internal magic that we can do, because we know internally, we know the structure of the data that you will be providing, because it's data that we massage in the r2dii ecosystem before you input it into the r2dii.plot package. In comparison, the interface in the Y API meets the data requirements mostly with preparation functions that are already embedded in the API. So those functions are called prep underscore something, like prep timeline, prep techniques, and prep trajectory. And also via explicit arguments. There is a lot less magic, a lot less assumptions that we do about the structure of your data, and instead you give explicit arguments to the functions. So just to give you a feel for what those two APIs look like, as I said before, we use here example data sets that come with the package. So our data in this case is going to be the market share data. In the X API, which is the thinner one, the one that has less arguments in the functions that we provide, the filtering, the preparation step happens with, for example, in this case, with the filter function of the dplyr package. We are here focusing on a specific sector. We are focusing on a specific technology. We are focusing on a specific region, a specific scenario source. And in particular, we are looking into years that are beyond 2025. Less than 2025. So the preparation step, again, with the filter function in dplyr, and then the plot underscore trajectory function in the version X right away does what it's meant to do. So this is what the plot looks like. For the Y API, this is the difference. So the data is exactly the same. There is no difference there. It inputs the same data. But notice that there is a prep underscore trajectory Y function here that does the filtering that before we did in the with the dplyr function. So now the filtering is embedded in the function. And also, in this case, we have a value argument that didn't exist before, which is an argument that allows you to tell specifically which is the column that holds, in this case, the production data that will be plotted. Also, there is a bunch of other arguments that need to be passed to the plot trajectory function. Before, the plot trajectory function did a lot of magic under the hoods. Here it is explicit. You need to provide these arguments, what are that are called scenario specs, from good to bad, the main line metric, and additional line metrics, which is actually optional. So as you can see, the two, and summing up, actually I think it's beyond 5 minutes. Summing up, the two interfaces do the same, but in a different way. Summarizing again, with the X version, you do a lot of preparation with dplyr functions and a lot less explicit arguments. And with the Y interface, you do the preparation explicitly with a custom function that we provide, and explicitly giving some arguments as opposed to relying on internal magic of the functions. So that is all for the comparison. I realized that I need to go a little faster if we want to fit everything in this meetup. So I'll make a little pause here to ask Monica, what's your feel for how to use the rest of the time? Should we still go for the X interface and Y in depth, or what do you think, Monica?
Yeah, I think so. Maybe you can just go quickly through the X because it's shorter, or I can already elaborate what's the why the two.
Perfect.
What's the difference between the two? We can also do that actually.
Okay, so maybe let's do that. Yeah.
So let me maybe share my screen now.
Can I? I'll make in the end. The question in the end.
No, you can ask questions.
Okay, so the package will include also the technology mix and etc. The other graphs, right? Or for now it's just a trajectory ones.
No, yeah. So maybe that's also confusing. So let me show all the functions that are inside, maybe to make things clear. So I'm going to talk about the Y API because it was actually the first API that we developed, or mainly I developed, and it's very elaborate. I'm not gonna talk about all of these plots, but just explain the idea that it's much more elaborate, like what the user has to provide to the functions, but at the same time, there is a lot of customization that you can do, and you basically don't need to know anything else except for this package to make these plots. Like, you relabel everything inside of this package. You don't need to know how to recode things with dplyr or reorder data or things like that. So yeah, the trajectory plot was already presented by Mauro. So there is also this TechMix plot, which in here it's still the minimal interface, because actually if you don't provide any additional arguments, the plot will still... Oh, do you see my screen?
I do see it, actually.
I do now.
Okay, good. So, again, this function is still quite intelligent, so we can still figure out a lot of things from the data. Although you do have this prep techmix function that you have to run before you run the plotting function, which is not the case in the X version, because in the X version you just run one function and you get the plot. Like on the output of r2dii analysis, you just run the plotting function. But with the techniques, you can also you also have this additional argument that you can pass. Like for example, you can change the order of the bars, or you can make custom labels for the bars, and also you can change the colors, you can rename the colors, all these kind of things. And in here, you do it using a data, or like a table, like a data structure that has to be structured specifically. So this is something that's of interest to us. If like you think this is more easy to use, having this kind of data structure that you pass and as an argument to the plotting function to customize the plot, or as a user, are you comfortable enough with like kind of preparing the data yourself using dplyr and then passing it to the plotting function in the right, like looking the way you want them to look. Yeah, I don't know actually what can I add here.
Well, I mean, I think people is curious to see probably the last type of plot. So in my demo, I showed trajectory. Now you have just shown techniques. So maybe if you can scroll to the timeline one, that would cover at least each kind of plot, and then people is free to go and explore on themselves the two different articles that we wrote to see how would you do it yourself with the two different APIs.
Yeah, so the plot timeline is actually the simplest one, and I think it's almost the same in two versions, with the exception that, again, it's more like you have this prep function in the Y version, and in the X version, you just prepare the data yourself. And here also in the Y version, you have this opportunity to customize your data using this specs argument, where you can change the labels or you can change the colors. And again, maybe I can open the X. Yeah, so basically in the X version, you would like do it before you call the plotting function. You would make like all the relabeling yourself, and then you call the plotting function.
Great, thanks, Monica. I think it would be nice to maybe leave, if now that you're there, how about we click on the reference menu just to show like an overview of the two different APIs, and then with that as a background, we leave the room open for questions or maybe a discussion about the process if people is interested in that.
Yeah, I wasn't following the order of hands.
Yeah. Is that okay? Can we click on the reference menu?
I did that.
You did? Ah, okay. It looks like it's not refreshing on my end. Okay, I advertise them to people.
I cannot see it.
But we can start with the question.
There you go. Yeah, let's do that. I think it was Daisy rose a hand and she asked a question. I see CJ's hand up.
No, I didn't have my hand raised, but if I may, yeah, I know. Maybe I just give the floor to the other people that were raising their hands first, and I will go at the end.
Okay. Since my name was mentioned. One, I can't see Monica's screen again. Also, I've been thinking in this that to me it's not super clear. Like, what is the difference between these two like different sets of things? It kind of feels like one of them, for instance, takes the strategy. Okay, the user needs to sort of prepare their data beforehand, and then pass it into the function, and where the other kind of says, yeah, just give me whatever data you have, and then I'll do all the things. And I think it might be helpful for me, and also for your users, also for the people you're asking to do this, to do it like really quickly and whatever, to try and tell us what that difference is in as short and easy terms as possible. And I think it might also be interesting to hear like what you think the pros and cons of those two versions are. And I could understand why you might want to avoid that, because you don't want to introduce some sort of bias into it. But I think that would like really solidify like what you're trying to ask us here, and then I might be more willing to do this in like 5 minutes rather than think I need to spend 45 minutes playing around and figuring out how to use the package just to understand what kind of feedback I should give.
Okay, do you see my screen now or not?
I do not, but
no.
Okay. Yes, I can see it now. How about everyone see?
So basically, the difference is, I would say, the X version is kind of has much simpler interface in the sense that you don't have to specify almost anything, any input to the plotting function itself, but you have to kind of do the work beforehand if you want the plot to look good, in the sense like if you want to have nice labels, you have to recode the data. You need to do the filtering using dplyr and not a custom function. So basically you kind of need more R knowledge, like general R knowledge, to use this version. And then for the version Y, it's like you kind of need to do more like custom setup before, but you don't need to know R per se, like dplyr or I don't know, ggplot functions or something, because it's all kind of inside of the function. And the thinking, so, and basically these are the kind of so the pro of the X version is that it's very simple to call the function itself, but you need to know more R. And then the second version is like, you need to know this package. And my thinking behind the Y version was that maybe like the users from the bank side will be actually more comfortable with this kind of setup than with using dplyr and recoding, etc. But of course, like, we don't know that. I think you know it better than we do.
If I may, I would add one perspective as well, which is that of the maintainers, because this is an internal kind of meeting. So what we, of course, in an A/B testing exercise, we are focused on the user, right? So I think it makes a lot of sense what Monica is putting forward, which is we are trying to imagine what is our most common user and what needs they may have and what experiences they may bring with themselves. On the other hand is maintainability. So for example, the more arguments that we support, of course, the bigger the code base grows and the more code we have to maintain, as opposed to, for example, just throwing an error and saying, hey, your data doesn't have the structure that we expect, please fix that and then go back to us, right? So in the thinner API, we don't do a lot. We just throw errors that are as informative as possible and leave the responsibility to the user to basically reuse their knowledge, assuming that they already know something about dplyr, for example, or ggplot2, as opposed to the thicker API, which we do the work ourselves and we maintain the code. That was that's to really good point, CJ. The pros and cons we omitted and we are now saying them aloud, but we should probably write them too. hard to say who is next, so whoever feels comfortable speaking, go ahead.
I want to throw in a comment real quick on soliciting feedback. I think probably the most straightforward path for feedback right now is I will throw up a poll in the coding channel, and we can have extended discussion in the comments of that poll. So, because we are running a bit shy on time here, that is, I think, a place where we can talk more about this.
Thanks, it's a great idea.
But then I see Jackson's hand.
Yeah, I think, I guess we only have 2 minutes, but just quickly, I think it's also obviously important to have the use case and like user in mind that we're actually targeting for. And I think there's like a couple of distinct ones. Obviously, internal people that would use the package are one, and then banks are another. And I think that either API could prove better or worse for each use case. So just like, for instance, if half the people polled have banks in mind and half the people polled have like r2dii analysts in mind, it's likely that they're just going to choose one or the other based on that alone. And I don't know if that's a useful sample group or like useful feedback. So maybe good to specify that, like who should we pretend we're being when we're making that decision? Maybe. I don't know. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I would probably leave that also a bit to Alex's input, as he's kind of closer to the stakeholders, I guess, as a manager of the entire Pagta ecosystem.
Yeah, I completely agree that we do have to consider different use cases for our different things. I think that we can talk more about what are the different use cases in the thread, but ultimately having it be easy for the users who don't know what they're doing is important, but also we do want to give people power features. That's always going to be a tricky balance. So I think that I have a couple of ideas that I'm going to throw into the thread that might help us balance that.
Okay. I think all I was trying to get to at that point is that before we vote as people who are being asked for feedback, we should try to align on who we're pretending to be when we're making that decision. So we'll try to do that, I guess.
Yeah, so maybe as part of the discussion, I think it would be really useful if you could make distinctions between, obviously it's going to be one person, one vote, but it would be useful to, in the discussion, be if you have something like, personally, I would prefer this version of it, but the users I deal with would almost certainly prefer this other version.
Yeah.
Cool. I really like the idea of following up because, we fall short time. Also because some important people are not in this meeting, like George, for example. So the plan we have with Monica is to record again a very succinct version of what we have just said, and maybe add that to the thread. And then I'll invite George and any other, or we'll invite George and any other important beta tester to that thread. So they have everything there. They have the, as Jackson suggested, they have the ideal user that we're aiming for. They have the video that we recorded, and then they also have the link to the full meetup. And before I say bye, I would like to pass the ball back to Monica in case she wants to add something.
No, not really. Thanks for coming and looking forward to your feedback.
Yeah, I acknowledge that we haven't given the chance to a lot of people to ask their questions, but I hope that Alex's idea of having a thread apart will give you that chance.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks so much.